You never truly understood the words give, and it shall be given, because the world taught you to hear them backward. You were taught to give in order to get. You were taught that giving is a spiritual investment that returns interest. But this teaching has quietly kept you bound to fear, expectation, and personal will. True giving has nothing to do with things money, time, or effort. Those are only symbols. Giving is not something you do with your hands. It is something that happens when the mind releases its grip. The moment you try to give so that something may come back, you are no longer giving. You are bargaining. And bargaining belongs to the world of limitation, not the realm of spirit. Giving in its true sense is the act of letting go of the belief that you are separate from the source of supply. When you release the belief that you must hold on, protect, accumulate, or control, life begins to flow through you without resistance. You do not give love to receive love. You recognize love as already present and it expresses itself. You do not give forgiveness to earn peace. You let go of judgment and peace is revealed. You do not give generosity to be rewarded. You surrender, the belief in lack and abundance appears. What is given is not measured in what leaves your possession, but in what leaves your consciousness. When fear is given up, peace is given back. When control is given up, harmony is given back. When the false sense of a personal self is given up, divine order is given back. This is why the teaching does not say give and you might receive. It says it shall be given, not by a person, not by circumstances, not by effort, but by the law of spiritual alignment. The universe does not reward giving. It reflects consciousness. When consciousness is free, open, and trusting, life mirrors that freedom, openness, and trust. You were never meant to struggle to be generous. You were meant to awaken to the truth that you are already supplied. From that awareness, giving becomes effortless, natural, and joyful. So the real question is not what can I give today, but what belief am I willing to release? When you give up fear, life gives you peace. When you give up resistance, life gives you grace. When you give up the illusion of separation, life gives you everything that was already yours. When it is said that true giving is an inner recognition and not an outer transaction, it points to a misunderstanding that has shaped almost every spiritual effort. Most people believe giving begins with an action, something handed over, something sacrificed, something done. In this view, the value of giving is measured by the size of the act or the cost involved. Yet this approach keeps the individual trapped in the belief that supply exists outside of them and must be moved from one place to another. This is not giving but exchange, and exchange always carries fear because it assumes loss. True giving begins before any action takes place. It begins in consciousness as a recognition that there is nothing to give away because nothing real can be lost. When a person truly recognizes that life, intelligence, love, and supply are not personal possessions, but ever-present realities, the act of giving loses all strain. One does not give to improve the flow of life, but because life is already flowing. This recognition dissolves the idea of a giver and a receiver and replaces it with awareness of one continuous movement. Outer giving without inner recognition often strengthens the sense of separation. The one who gives feels diminished, and the one who receives feels dependent. Even generosity can hide a subtle belief in lack when it is driven by effort, obligation, or hope of return. But when giving arises from inner recognition, there is no sense of sacrifice, no pride, and no expectation. The act becomes as natural as breathing because it is not personal. Inner recognition means seeing that what you are giving was never yours to begin with. Love was never created by you, so it cannot be depleted by expression. Peace does not originate in effort, so it cannot be exhausted by sharing. Wisdom does not belong to the mind, so it cannot be reduced by offering it. When this is seen clearly, fear drops away and giving becomes effortless. The world teaches that you must give more to receive more, but consciousness reveals that you receive more when you stop believing you have less. Giving then is not about increasing flow, but removing resistance. The resistance is the belief that supply is limited and personal. Once that belief loosens, life no longer needs to be managed. This is why two people can give the same amount outwardly and experience completely different results. One gives with tension, calculation, and expectation, while the other gives with freedom and trust. The outer act looks identical, but the inner state determines the reflection. Consciousness always precedes form. When giving is understood as inner recognition, the question changes. It is no longer about what should be given, but what false belief is ready to be released. As the grip on personal ownership relaxes, the sense of abundance reveals itself without effort or planning or force. When it is said that giving is the release of fear, lack, and personal control, it reveals that the real obstacle to abundance is not the absence of resources, but the presence of anxiety in consciousness. Fear creates the illusion that life must be managed, defended, and directed by a personal self. From this belief comes the constant urge to hold on, protect, accumulate, and calculate every action, including spiritual ones. Giving under fear always feels risky because it assumes that what is released may not return. True giving begins when fear is exposed as a false guide. Fear insists that supply is limited, that tomorrow is uncertain, and that survival depends on personal effort. As long as these assumptions remain active, the individual experiences tension even in generosity. There is always a subtle hesitation, an inner question, asking whether this act is safe. That hesitation is not caused by the act of giving, but by the belief that the source of supply is fragile. Releasing fear does not mean becoming careless or irresponsible. It means withdrawing trust from the belief that control creates security. Personal control is the attempt to force life into predictable patterns in order to feel safe. Yet this very attempt blocks the natural movement of harmony because it replaces trust with pressure. When control relaxes, awareness opens and life begins to move with intelligence rather than resistance. Lack is not a condition but a perception. It arises when consciousness is fixed on what appears missing instead of what is already present. Giving becomes difficult when attention is locked on to the idea of insufficiency. The mind then interprets every release as loss. But when lack is recognized as a mental construct, giving no longer threatens identity or survival. It becomes an expression of confidence in an unseen order that sustains without effort. To give is therefore not to part with something but to part with fear. It is the willingness to step out of mental contraction and allow life to circulate freely. In that openness there is a subtle shift from doing to allowing. The individual no longer feels responsible for making outcomes happen. Instead, there is a quiet trust that what is needed will appear as needed. Personal control thrives on timing strategies and outcomes. It wants to know when and how the return will come. True giving releases all of this. It does not wait for reassurance because reassurance is already present as inner peace. The act becomes clean, simple, and free from inner debate. When fear is released, there is no sense of bravery or sacrifice because nothing is being overcome. The giving flows naturally because it is not measured against future security. Life is no longer seen as a series of transactions, but as a continuous movement of supply. As fear, lack, and control dissolve, consciousness becomes receptive. In that receptivity, the conditions of harmony, support, and abundance emerge, not as rewards but as reflections of inner freedom. When it is said that what you give in consciousness is what multiplies in experience, it points to a law far deeper than material cause and effect. Life does not respond primarily to actions but to the state of awareness from which those actions arise. Consciousness is the creative field and experience is its visible expression. What is held inwardly as belief, expectation, or assumption quietly shapes the outer world without effort or intention. Most people focus on what they give outwardly while remaining unaware of what they are constantly giving inwardly. Fear, resentment, trust, gratitude, patience, and love are being offered to life at every moment. These inner offerings do not remain private. They set the tone of experience. When fear is continuously given in consciousness, life reflects uncertainty. When resentment is entertained, relationships mirror conflict. When trust is present, circumstances align with support. Multiplication does not mean that something is returned in equal measure. It means that consciousness reproduces its own quality. Whatever is planted as awareness grows into form because the mind interprets reality through that lens. A person who gives appreciation inwardly begins to notice opportunities, harmony, and cooperation, not because the world has changed, but because perception has shifted. Experience expands in the direction of awareness. This is why two individuals can perform identical outward acts and receive entirely different results. One gives while internally affirming lack, struggle, or obligation. The other gives while resting in ease, abundance, and trust. The outer form looks the same, but the consciousness behind it determines what multiplies. Life does not respond to effort, but to conviction. Giving in consciousness happens through attention. Whatever you consistently focus on is what you offer to the creative field. Attention is a form of agreement. When attention rests on limitation, limitation multiplies. When attention rests on possibility, support appears. This is not positive thinking, but alignment. It is not about forcing thoughts, but about recognizing what is being consented to inwardly. Many people attempt to change experience by adjusting behavior while leaving consciousness untouched. They give more, do more, try harder, and remain confused when results do not change. The inner state continues to reproduce itself regardless of activity. Transformation begins when the inner gift changes. To give peace in consciousness means to stop rehearsing conflict. To give abundance means to release the narrative of insufficiency. To give love means to withdraw judgment. These are not actions, but decisions of awareness. Once given, they naturally unfold into experience without planning. Consciousness multiplies because it is indivisible. There is no separation between inner and outer, only a difference of visibility. What is accepted inwardly becomes familiar, and the familiar appears normal and inevitable. Life then arranges itself to confirm what is already assumed to be true. When this principle is understood, the struggle to manipulate circumstances fades. Attention shifts from managing results to tending awareness. Giving becomes a quiet inner offering that shapes experience without strain. Life reflects not what is requested, but what is consistently given within. When giving is described as alignment with divine flow, and not an attempt to receive, it exposes a subtle motive that often hides beneath spiritual practice. Many acts that appear generous are actually driven by expectation. The mind gives while quietly watching for a return. Even when the return is spiritual, such as peace, blessings, or security, the motive still comes from the belief that something is missing and must be obtained. This belief places the individual outside the flow of life, trying to enter it through effort. Alignment means recognizing that the flow already exists and that nothing needs to be added to it. Life is not withholding, waiting to be persuaded by good behavior or generosity. The flow of supply, harmony, and intelligence is constant, but it can only be experienced when resistance drops. Giving becomes an act of cooperation rather than persuasion. When giving is used as a method to receive, the focus remains on outcome. The mind measures, weighs, and compares. It watches circumstances and evaluates whether the giving worked. This creates tension because the individual feels responsible for making the law function. True alignment removes responsibility for results. The giver rests in trust, knowing that life does not need instruction. Divine flow cannot be manipulated because it is not external. It moves through awareness. When awareness is open, receptive, and unguarded, the flow is felt naturally. Giving then becomes an expression of that openness, not a strategy to maintain it. The action arises because consciousness is already in harmony, not to achieve harmony. Attempts to receive through giving often come from the fear of interruption. The mind fears that if it stops doing something, supply will stop. This fear keeps the individual busy but disconnected. Alignment invites stillness. In stillness there is recognition that nothing needs to be earned or sustained through effort. When one is aligned, giving feels effortless and unremarkable. There is no sense of virtue or spiritual achievement. The act does not stand out because it is simply life moving as itself. There is no anticipation of reward because there is no sense of separation from what is desired. This is why alignment cannot be achieved by technique. It is a surrender of motive. The moment the mind stops asking what it will gain, the flow becomes visible, not because it was activated, but because it was no longer blocked by expectation. Giving from alignment is not selective. It does not depend on worthiness, timing, or guarantee. It arises naturally wherever life moves. The person no longer decides when to give but responds spontaneously without inner debate. Receiving then becomes incidental. It is not tracked or analyzed. Life supports quietly in ways that feel ordinary rather than miraculous. The absence of striving allows intelligence to arrange details beyond personal planning. When giving is no longer used as a lever to pull results, it becomes pure expression. In that purity, the individual stands within the stream rather than beside it. What flows through is not measured but lived as a continuous unfolding of sufficiency and order. When it is said that when the self steps aside, abundance appears naturally, it points to the unseen interference created by the personal sense of identity. The self being referred to is not individuality or personality, but the belief that a separate door is responsible for creating, sustaining, and protecting life. This belief places enormous pressure on the mind and quietly blocks the effortless movement of supply. Abundance is not withheld by life but obscured by the constant activity of self-centered control. The personal self measures everything against its own survival. It asks whether there is enough time, enough money, enough opportunity, and enough recognition. From these questions arise anxiety, comparison, and competition. Even spiritual efforts become entangled in self-preservation. Giving becomes a way to secure the future rather than an expression of present completeness. When the self steps aside, there is a relaxation of this constant self-reference. Awareness shifts from what is happening to me to what is happening. This shift dissolves the tension created by personal ownership. Life is no longer filtered through the question of benefit or loss. In that openness, abundance is no longer pursued because it is already perceived. The self interferes by insisting on control. It wants to decide how supply should come, when it should come, and through whom. This insistence narrows the field of possibility. Life, however, moves through intelligence, not preference. When the self releases its grip, the field widens and support appears from directions that could not be planned. Stepping aside does not mean becoming passive or indifferent. It means withdrawing the belief that life depends on personal effort alone. Action still happens, but without strain. Decisions are made without fear. Work continues without the weight of self-importance. The absence of inner resistance allows clarity to guide movement naturally. Abundance appears not as excess, but as sufficiency. There is a sense that what is needed is always present at the moment it is required. This perception eliminates urgency. Without urgency there is no hoarding, and without hoarding there is flow. The self dissolves where trust begins. The self also creates comparison, which breeds scarcity. It looks at what others have and measures itself against them. This comparison reinforces the illusion of limited supply. When the self steps aside, comparison loses relevance. Life is experienced directly rather than competitively. What belongs to another is no longer seen as a threat. Abundance is natural because life itself is self-sustaining. Trees do not strain to produce fruit, and rivers do not fear running dry. These movements are uninterrupted because there is no self-consciousness obstructing them. When human awareness releases its self-imposed burden, it begins to reflect the same ease. What remains when the self steps aside is presence. In presence there is no future to secure and no past to protect. Giving and receiving happen within the same movement without calculation. Life is trusted because it is no longer being resisted. Abundance then is not something acquired, but something revealed when the noise of the personal self quiets to let it be seen. When it is said that spiritual giving begins with awareness and not effort, it reveals why so much sincere striving produces so little peace. Effort belongs to the mind that believes something must be achieved or maintained. Awareness belongs to recognition. Effort strains toward a future outcome while awareness rests in present reality. Spiritual giving does not originate from trying to be good, generous, or holy, but from seeing what already is. Effort assumes separation. It implies that the giver stands apart from what is being given and must push something outward. This creates fatigue because the mind is constantly managing itself. Even kindness becomes labor when it is forced. Awareness dissolves this division. When awareness is present, giving happens without intention because there is no longer a sense of distance between inner and outer. Spiritual giving is not an act of will. The moment will is involved, the ego quietly takes ownership. The giver becomes aware of themselves as the one giving, and this self-awareness blocks the flow. Awareness, on the other hand, is impersonal. It observes without claiming. When awareness is clear, action arises naturally without the need to be initiated. Many people believe they must practice giving through discipline. They try to remember to be patient, loving, or generous. While this can soften behavior, it does not transform consciousness. The effort to remember reveals that the state is not yet natural. Awareness allows the state to be revealed rather than manufactured. When awareness deepens, the sense of lack fades. One does not give to fill a gap because no gap is perceived. The mind is not busy calculating whether it has enough to give. It simply responds to what is present. The giving flows from seeing rather than from deciding. Effort is often accompanied by judgment. The mind evaluates whether it is giving enough or correctly. This self-evaluation keeps attention turned inward in a restrictive way. Awareness frees attention. It is spacious and inclusive. In that space, generosity unfolds without commentary. Spiritual giving through awareness is quiet. It does not announce itself or seek validation. There is no inner narrative about virtue or sacrifice. The act disappears as soon as it occurs because it was never claimed. This absence of self-reference is what keeps the flow uninterrupted. Effort tries to create a spiritual identity. Awareness dissolves identity. The more awareness expands, the less there is someone to take credit. What remains is movement without ownership. This is why effort eventually exhausts while awareness renews. Effort draws from personal energy. Awareness aligns with an infinite source. When giving comes from awareness, it does not deplete because nothing personal is being used. As awareness becomes the foundation of action, life begins to move with simplicity. Responses are appropriate without being rehearsed. Needs are met without being chased. Giving and receiving become two aspects of one movement rather than separate events. Spiritual giving begins the moment awareness recognizes itself as the source. From that recognition, action flows freely, unforced and complete. The true meaning of give, and it shall be given, is not found in effort, exchange, or expectation, but in a shift of awareness. Giving is revealed as an inner release rather than an outer act, a surrender of fear, control, and separation, rather than a transaction meant to secure return. As consciousness relaxes its grip, life flows unobstructed, reflecting the quality of what is quietly offered within. When motive dissolves, self steps aside, and awareness replaces effort, giving becomes natural and unforced. In that state, abundance is no longer pursued, earned, or managed, because it is recognized as the ever-present movement of life itself, expressing without resistance.